This is Nervous Nellies and Fearful Freddies, and we're talking about helping shy pets feel safe. My name is Jessica Char. I have met some of you and seen some of you at my previous webinars. Thank you so much for joining me again. And thank you so much to Silicon Valley Pet Project for hosting this and having me today. Your microphones are off just to prevent background noise, but you're absolutely welcome to use the chat at any point to introduce yourself and your pet and to ask questions. I'll try to keep an eye on the questions as we go and answer them in the moment if it's appropriate. But if I don't answer them, there'll be definitely time at the end for more questions. And if I seem to have missed your question, feel free to ask it again. I also have an amazing co-host today from Silicon Valley Pet Project, Ashley, and she's going to be helping keep an eye on the questions and make sure that I don't miss any. This is being recorded, so if you miss anything or you want to go back and watch it again, you're more than welcome to, or if you want to share it with a friend, you can do that as well. So let's get started. So today, we're touching on a few key points. The first one being, what do we even mean by shy or fearful? What do these words tell us about an animal, and what can we infer? We're going to talk about the 4 F's. Fearful is not one of those 4 F's. We're going to talk about then, we've identified our fearful animal, what are we going to do to build their confidence and to help them? And then, like I said, time for questions at the end. So first off, about me. Many of you have heard the spiel and seen this cute picture before, but my name is Jessica Char. I'm the owner and trainer at 2 pet behavior and training businesses, Canine Engineering, which is the dog side, and Feline Engineering is the cat side. I'm a member of the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants and the Association for Professional Dog Trainers, Certified Professional Dog Trainer, Fear-Free Certified Trainer, Certified Separation Anxiety Trainer. All right, this is my bunny Dewey doing his one of his favorite tricks, my favorite trick for him, which is this high five. And no, he doesn't have ears, but that is a rabbit. All right, so first point we need to figure out, what do we even mean by shy or fearful? If we have a shy animal, do we have a fearful animal? Really, it's not a yes or no question. We're not looking at a binary between an animal who is fearful and an animal who's not fearful. Fear is an emotion that's triggered by a particular situation, an environment, a person, another animal, a way of being touched maybe something like being left alone. So an animal can be perfectly confident in 95% of situations, but then have a fearful reaction in a small subset. Or they can have lots of triggers in their life. And that's often when we label an animal as shy or fearful, is when we see that they have many triggers for feeling fear in their daily life. So when we talk about this idea of a fearful animal, what we're really saying is an animal that is displaying a certain set of behaviors that indicate that they are feeling the emotion of fear. It's not a personality trait, it's just an emotion that they feel. And a fearful animal is likely feeling that emotion often enough that we're very aware of it and it's negatively contributing to their life and their happiness. Individuals will feel their emotions at different intensities and display different behaviors about those. We're going to talk more about that, but we might see 2 animals displaying the same behavior, but actually one is much more fearful than the other. We don't have a way of knowing that necessarily. And we might see 2 animals display very different behaviors, but actually both having a similar level of fear. So it's important to realize that we're not just looking for one behavior equals fear, and we're not just labeling an animal as fearful in a blanket sort of way. Emotions and behavior aren't static, they change, they're very flexible. So if an animal can feel confident and relaxed in one moment and fearful in the next, and then back to confident and comfortable. And fear is not like an opposite personality to confident and friendly. It's just one of the emotions you can feel. I always think of that Pixar movie Inside Out, and all the emotions are kind of sitting there together, and they contribute more or less at different times, but it's not like a bunch, only one exists full time or anything like that. Where does fear come from? So often we have stories about why we have a fearful animal, but in reality, fear comes usually from a lack of socialization or exposure to a particular trigger. So all animals, humans, dogs, and cats included, are primed to accept new things when we're young and then become more cautious of those things as we get older. The idea being, if you never experience something in the first year of your life or the first 30 years of your life, then it's not normal in your environment. It's not typical. And if something's not typical, it might be dangerous. So we need to be very cautious that it could be dangerous. So that's kind of the root in our brain of that caution is, if I've never experienced this, I should be wary of it. And when our pets don't experience things when they're young, they can grow up to have fear of those things. Genetics plays a role here. Some animals are quicker to label something as potentially dangerous and worthy of being frightened by, where some animals just seem very open to taking on new experiences even though they have no reason to be. And then the last sort of reasoning would be negative experiences. This is where we often assume fear comes from. We think, oh, this kitten was born outdoors. That was a tragic, stressful environment for it, and now it's shy. Or we think, this dog is fearful of men with beards. A man with a beard must have kicked the dog or abused the dog. And certainly negative experiences contribute to fear. But sometimes we put too much weight into this category. The most fearful animals I've ever known are animals who just never had experience with people. It's not that they've had bad experiences, they've just never had experiences. So be careful about assuming abuse or things and realize that we have this whole picture involved. All right, so when we talk about fear, it's an underlying emotion that we can tell the animal is feeling that emotion because of their behavior. And those behaviors are fight or flight, right? An animal chases away the scary thing or they run away from the scary thing. It turns out it's not quite that simple. There are actually 4 F's we need to consider. There's fight and flight, absolutely. But there are also 2 other ones that you might not be as familiar with. One is freeze, and the other we call fidget. So freeze makes sense. Hold very still and hope the threat doesn't hurt you. Fidget is kind of a different one. It's, I'm just going to distract myself. So I think of fidget as I'm standing in a line, 6 feet apart from everybody else, of course. And I notice that the person coming up to stand behind me is a little bit familiar. And I think maybe I'm supposed to know them, but I can't remember their name. And maybe I'm wrong. And I don't really want to make small talk because I'm uncomfortable with that. So what do? I pull out my phone. I'm just going to look at my phone real quick and like pretend I don't notice you. That is a fidget response to the stress of wondering if I'm supposed to know this person, being unsure, being uncomfortable with the idea of small talk. So our pets have that same response to stress and fear. So this is I apologize, slightly blurry table courtesy of Fear Free Shelters, which is an organization working to support decreasing fear and stress for animals in shelters. And you can see the kind of body language signs of these 4. I'm not going to go through every step, but we have fight, pretty obvious. With dogs, we're familiar with what this looks like. They're going to struggle, they're going to growl, snap, maybe even bite. Flight would be trying to get away, turning their body. I want us to look at this one, rolling over to evade contact. Who here said, oh, they rolled over and showed me their belly. They're so happy to see me, they want a belly rub. That can absolutely be true. But we also need to take into consideration that that animal might be having a fear response and trying to avoid being touched or trying to become sort of less of a threat for you. I'm no threat, please don't hurt me, rolling over to avoid contact. This next category, again, is this one that's sometimes new to people, this idea of the fret or the fidget stage. I've also heard this called the flirt stage. I'm going to kind of try to be friends because I'm worried and I want you to know that I'm no threat. So I'm kind of going to show how cute I am. This is when sometimes we see dogs in particular get very jumpy. They might start to mouth on us. And then they also might kind of disconnect from us, get really distracted and start to just want to sniff. Suddenly they've stopped working and giving us eye contact and practicing the training we've been trying to do, and they just are sniffing. And that could just be distraction. There's something interesting on the ground, but it could also be a reaction to some stressor in the environment. So that other dog came closer and suddenly all I want to do is stick my head in a bush. Could be a stress sign. And then we have freeze. And what I want to talk about with freeze is this idea of just hunkering down, not moving, maybe even looking like we're sleeping. And it's word at the bottom, helpless. Often it's easy to confuse freeze for being fine, not the same F. Just because a dog isn't fighting back or trying to run away doesn't mean that they're not showing fear. So we really want to be aware of and notice this freeze stage. And we are going to see an example of why it's really important to notice that freeze stage at a little bit later. So some pictures of that fearful body language. Top left, that's what we call whale eye, a dog who's turning their head in one direction but looking in another, kind of unsure, keeping an eye on something that might be a threat, might seem dangerous or scary to them. And the dog on the bottom left is licking its lips and kind of ducking its head down as this person reaches for it. So we might think, oh, but they're letting us pet them, but we're still seeing those stress signs and those fear signs. The two dogs on the right are dogs whose body language is kind of conflicted. They're leaning in two different ways at the same time almost, especially the middle dog, the picture that's not as good because it's the one I took on my phone. That dog is like, I would like that cheese in your hand, but I also want to be ready to run away. Cats, same thing. So the behaviors might look slightly different. Cats use their tails in slightly different ways. They use their bodies in slightly different ways, but we see the same fight, flight, fidget, and freeze behaviors. And again, we see this sort of shutting down behavior that is not fine. It's not that they're handling the fear any better, but it is that stress behavior. So again, with cat behavior, we're seeing cats leaning away. This cat in the middle is looks like he's kind of puffing himself up. I'm big, I'm not scared of you, but I'm also kind of moving sideways at the same time that I'm facing you as a threat. And then this one on the right, I suspect, is in a solid freeze mode, worried that if he takes off running, he's going to trigger that dog to chase him. So this is pretty common how we think of this fidget, freeze, flight, and fight. You might have seen diagrams like this online where we see this arrow pointing. First, the animal kind of gets distracted, like, oh, I'm gonna sniff around and be distracted, then I'm gonna freeze, then I'm gonna try to run away, then I'm gonna try to bite you. It turns out this is not accurate. And we do not see animals who progress through each of these steps in this order. There is no real order. And instead, it's situation dependent and it's animal dependent. So you might have your pet go to the vet and they immediately go into fight mode. And they're like, don't touch me, don't grab me, I'm gonna struggle. Maybe they're trying to bite, but maybe they're just struggling and trying to avoid and trying to get distance by fighting back. Often the vet, what would we do at the vet? We just hold them tighter. We say, you can't fight me, I'm gonna hold you tighter. And then our pet stops fighting. We think, okay, they feel better now. They've stopped fighting. They've gotten over that fear. But what category is that? Freeze. So it's not that the fear has left. It's not that the fear has changed. The fear might even be increased. We're just seeing a different set of behaviors that tell us that there's fear there. So for example, the same pet who fought the vet might see one of these and go straight to freeze. And again, if we're not aware of that freeze, we think, oh, that's fine. My pet is fine with this small child. They're not worried. Maybe I'll put the small child next to the pet and take a cute picture. And in doing that, we've accidentally pushed our pet to a flight or a fight stage. We haven't recognized that freeze as fear, and we've added to it, and we can, again, see a shift to another direction. And there are individual differences about how pets choose these tools. So pet number one really freezes when they're fearful. They just hold still and don't move. That's their primary, but the others are still there. So we see that fight is a small part of their response, but it's still there. If we ignore the freeze, or if we put the animal into the wrong situation, we're still going to see these other types of behaviors. Pet number two has a very different makeup. They're not the type to run away. They're not the type to freeze and not move, but they have a high likelihood of going into fidget stage. Maybe they are a dog who jumps up on you and mouths on you because they kind of get overwhelmed and nervous. But we also see this high fight stage. So they struggle and they try to avoid. Maybe they use their mouth harder. Maybe they actually growl, snap, or bite. And pet number one might get labeled as fine. Their fear might be missed, and they're now not having that addressed. And if they do get pushed to bite, it's out of the blue, right? Because they spent so much of their life freezing that no one ever noticed their fear. When they were pushed so far, then that's when they chose to bite, and someone was just shocked that that would happen. Pet number two is the kind of pet who sometimes gets labeled as difficult to train, and easily distracted. So they get a little bit of pressure put on them, they get a little nervous, and they kind of just disconnect. They get distracted. They jump on you, they stick their head in a bush to sniff, they're gone. And so then we try to train them harder. We say no, and we jerk their collar and we say, behave yourself, focus on me. Maybe I need to introduce punishment to get you to listen and to be trained. Because we're not recognizing that is a stress behavior and a fear behavior, we make it worse. So now they're stressed and we're punishing them, so the stress is getting worse. And then we're seeing maybe this fight behavior come out, and they're snapping at us because we've pushed them a little too far, thinking we were just trying to get their attention and get them to stop being distracted. This is also an animal who maybe gets labeled as aggressive because they're using that fight fear response more heavily, and they're not going through this sequence. They're still giving us warning signs, they're still showing us they're uncomfortable, but they're not trying to run away first, so we somehow label them not as fearful but as aggressive. These are all fear responses. Okay, so we've identified our fearful animal. There are videos to come, so you're going to get to see all these different types of behaviors, but let's jump into what we do about it. How do we start to build confidence in our pets? First off, I want to talk about management. And management means avoiding situations where your pet feels that fear, and also making sure everyone is safe in the moment. So thinking about safety tools for your individual pets. Muzzles is the first thing I would put on here, because often we sort of put muzzles in the category of bad dogs who bite and are mean or aggressive. Muzzles are a safety tool that let us give that animal more space and freedom, and thus decrease their fear. So if you're going to the vet and you have an animal who's inclined to go into fight mode at the vet, you might train them to be comfortable with a muzzle so that the vet doesn't have to hold them as tightly, or there isn't that restraint needed to keep people safe, and everyone's comfortable giving the animal a little more space to move around and to choose that interaction, and it can decrease the fear in that way. So safety tools can decrease fear just by giving us comfort to be around the animal. Supervision, making sure that I'm aware of what's going on and that my animal is actually comfortable in a certain situation. And separation, if my animal is starting to show fear signs, I'm removing them from that situation and putting them in another space. So this crate, for example, could be a safe space for a pet who's uncomfortable when small children come over. So the small children play in one area and the puppy and the dog stay in another area. And that is a totally appropriate way of handling that situation. Respect where your pet is now. Start with whatever they're scared of. You need to start where they are, and avoid situations that cause your pet fear or stress. So if you have a dog who's fearful of the hair dryer, you would put them in another room across the house before you use their hair dryer, or send them on a walk if you have 2 people in your home. If you have a pet who's afraid of being left alone, you would not leave them alone while you did other training. And of course, we don't have to live with these things. This is just step 1 to put our training on top of. advocate for your pet. Don't let others ignore their fear. You're not going to ignore it. Don't let other people do that. So don't let that person who says, oh, but I'm great with cats, reach under the bed to pet your fearful cat. That is not being great with cats. It's just not. And this goes for the vet as well. More and more vets are understanding the groomer. More and more vets and groomers are understanding that you can't ignore fear and just power through and get it done. That's actually going to make things worse in the long run. So make sure other people are supporting your pet's journey. And then I threw medication and supplements at the bottom of this. Medications and supplements that decrease fear and anxiety are useful when we can't manage our pet's life to give them, to remove their stress in that way. So for example, they're an animal who is very fearful of loud noises, and we live in an environment, in a city environment, where the neighbors are opening their doors and the car horns are going off, or it's thunderstorm season, or it's fireworks season. We can't manage things to decrease that fear and prevent that fear response. So we can use medications or supplements to bring that down a little bit and help our animal cope in that way while we do other training. So I put medications and supplements in the category of management because they help decrease the fear response while we're training so that we can train. The more the animal experiences that fear reaction, the more embedded it becomes. So we really want to prevent them from feeling that. Home setup. Setting up safe zones in your home for your fearful animals so that they can be away from the things that are scary to them. This could be a separate room, this could be a crate, this could be a space behind a baby gate, anything that indicates you will not be bothered, you're safe from whatever makes you nervous. So if you have small children in your home, a safe zone that your pet can go to that your children can't go to. I heard a great story recently. I unfortunately can't even give credit for this. I don't remember where I heard it, but the dog, they were using a safe zone for the dog in the laundry room, and there's a baby gate, and the two small children in the home knew not to touch the baby gate, and the dog actually started going to the gate when they needed a break from the kids and like barking at the gate, like open the gate and let me in. And then the dog would go in, and if someone didn't close the gate, the dog would bark again, being like, lock me in here because this is my safe zone and I need a break. So making sure your pet has those consistent places to use that are just theirs. Cats can use the top of a cat tree or a particular high place also for that. Securing your exits. Unfortunately, shy pets are at a very high risk of being lost and then being difficult to catch if they do get lost. So really being aware of your doors and windows just for safety. Put enrichment on here, making your home a very fulfilling space for your shy pet so that they can use their mind and body. We're going to talk more about enrichment later. Routine is so important for a lot of pets, but particularly shy pets. So setting up a routine so that life is predictable. When life is predictable, it's such a confidence builder. Unexpected things, even if those things aren't necessarily scary, here's a new toy, it's playtime now. That's not a scary situation for your pet, but if they weren't expecting it, it can throw them off a little bit. So routine of play, cuddles, food, whatever your pet enjoys, training, walks. And then for cats, I threw on here, cats need vertical space to really build that confidence and feel confident, and they need covered hiding places. So this orange cat in this picture knows that his safe little space is in this little cubby. I'm not going to reach in there and grab him. No one is going to reach in there and grab him. So he's comfortable kind of putting his paws out, playing with me, checking me out, maybe eating a treat, knowing that he can take himself away at any point. All right. So as we think about how to help our pets, can they just get over it? If we just wait and we just kind of keep exposing them to it, if we put them out there, we give them that experience of being around other animals or other people, will they get over that fear? So let's talk about whether they'll just get over it. The first word I want us to be familiar with is habituation. So habituation means that something that causes us a little bit of fear, a little bit of nervousness, but has no consequences, is occurring in our life. And after we experience it over and over again, especially if it's predictable, we stop caring. So habituation is what happens if you've ever moved into a new place with a lot more traffic outside. So I used to live next to a massive highway, and you stop hearing the cars. At first, they're kind of annoying, and then they just go away. You don't even hear them anymore. That's habituation. And the key here is that the trigger caused just a little bit of nervousness at first. Like, oh, I wasn't really sure I felt good about this, but I kind of got over it. It turns out it has no consequence, no problem. This is what happens when we bring a new pet home and we give them some space and some time for the first few days, and they go from being pretty nervous and unsure, jumping at loud noises, hesitating to approach us, to fully confident, relaxed, wiggling around, popping into our laps. They were a little unsure at first, but they quickly realized there were no consequences or no negative consequences to the things that they were nervous about. Now let's contrast that to this idea of flooding. Flooding is a trigger that causes fear. So there's no consequence to this experience. There is a negative consequence. The consequence is feeling fear. That's important to think about. Something that causes fear doesn't have to actually hurt us to have a negative consequence. The feeling is a negative consequence. And then the trigger is presented in a large amount with the goal that it only goes away when you stop being afraid. So this is if someone said to me, hey, you want to get over your fear of spiders, go stand in that room full of spiders until you realize the spiders aren't going to hurt you and you feel better about them. Now I can decide if I wanted to do that, if that felt like a good idea to me. It doesn't, but I could decide that. This is when people say, I was so scared of heights that I went skydiving to get over it. Hey, that's totally fine. That is a fair decision for you to make for yourself. If someone else made that decision for you, if someone else took me and shoved me into the room of spiders and said, when you stop screaming, we'll let you out, because then we'll know you're not afraid anymore. Or someone said, you need to get over your fear of heights. I'm going to take you up in a plane and throw you out. You would not get over your fear, and you would not like that person very much. So unfortunately, flooding has been portrayed by people online and on TV as a way of helping dogs and cats get over fear, because they expose them to something really scary. They throw them into an environment that scares them a lot. And then they say, well, see, at first they tried to run away or they tried to fight back, but then they stopped doing those things. And now they're just sitting there and they're fine. But what do we now know? Just sitting there doesn't mean fine. It means freeze. So we haven't changed the emotion. We can actually make the emotion much stronger. We can make that fear much worse. We've just changed the behavior. And if someone walks up to that just fine dog right now and pats them on the head, they could easily get, trigger that behavior again, running away or fighting back and triggering a bite. So when we kind of throw our animals into a situation and expect them to get over it because, they'll just stop feeling that emotion, it doesn't work. Please don't do this. It doesn't work. It's dangerous. It's a bad idea. So our pets don't just get over it. And while we're here, you cannot punish fear away. That does not work either, right? You can punish the behavior away, but I would not recommend that either, for the same reason I wouldn't recommend this. We're just changing the behavior, displacing one behavior for a different behavior with still having that underlying fear. And what can happen is we end up with dogs who used to growl, but now don't growl, they just bite. Because we've punished the growling. Don't you dare growl at me, that's bad. But we haven't addressed the fear that causes the growling. So now we don't get growling, but we do get biting. The fear is still there. So what can we do? For those of you who have been following these talks and joining me, desensitization and counter conditioning, I know there are some of you out here doing this work right now. Identifying the triggers, identifying what scares your pet, and being very specific about it. It's not just people, it's unfamiliar people or people they haven't been around more than 100 times, right? That might be what it takes to become familiar. At a distance of 8 feet, staring at them, wearing hats. Be specific about what those triggers are. Desensitization then is our first step. And this means taking small steps, exposing our pet to a thing that scares them in tiny, tiny doses that don't cause fear. Remember habituation? Something that doesn't really cause fear. It causes awareness, maybe a little nervousness, but there isn't that negative consequence of feeling fear. There's no consequence. So that's desensitization. When we say this normally causes you fear, but we're only going to present it in tiny, tiny steps, and we're going to slowly bring it closer as long as you don't feel fear. It's tricky. I will admit, it's a simple concept, but tricky to do in real life. We have to look at things like distance, duration, and intensity of the experience. So it might be, how far away am I from a dog who's fearful of me? How long have I been at that distance? And am I facing the dog directly and staring at them? Am I talking to them? Or am I sideways, maybe crouched down, maybe silent, or speaking in a quiet voice? And each of these factors is going to change how the dog reacts to me and whether they feel a little bit of nervousness or a lot of fear. Counter conditioning is what speeds this process up. This is where we add a consequence to being around that trigger. So initially the trigger had no consequence. It wasn't causing fear because we were doing these small steps. Counter conditioning is saying, we're going to do small steps that don't cause you fear, and we're in fact going to make it really positive by pairing it with something good. So the dog experiences, or the cat experiences, the trigger that would normally cause them fear, but in just a tiny dose, and then they get extra special treats. They go, oh, so this thing that I'm a little wary of actually means that treats are about to happen. Maybe I'm starting to feel better about this thing. And the emotion of that second thing, those special treats, or toy, or something we really enjoy, starts to rub off on that scary thing. Because now, just like when I hear the can opener and I get excited because I know food is coming, now when I see a stranger, I get excited because I know food is coming. Or toy. Order matters. We're going to see an example of how the wrong order can backfire. And the thing of remembering about this is, well, we can absolutely train specific behaviors. Counter conditioning doesn't require a specific behavior. We might in fact say, every time you see another dog, you get a treat, even if you're growling and barking at that other dog. Because if I want that pairing to be really, really tight and really, really strong, it needs to happen every single time. Every single time. So if you see another dog and oops, we made a mistake and we're too close, I'm still going to do my counter conditioning part, and I'm still going to give you treats. And then if we're having that fearful reaction, what do? We can't punish them. That won't help. We're trying to build good feelings, and punishment won't do that. All we can do is stop what we're doing and move further away. So I'm going to stop trying to touch the animal because I'm causing them fear, or I'm going to move them away from the other thing that's causing them fear, and that's it. So when I start saying things like, even if my dog is barking at another dog, I'm going to give him treats, this question comes up. Isn't that reinforcing the barking? Sometimes we talk about, some people might say, oh, you shouldn't comfort your dog if they're scared during a thunderstorm because it will reinforce that fear. Can you reinforce fear? No, you can't reinforce fear. Fear is not a voluntary behavior. It's not a choice that anyone is making in order to get a consequence. Reinforcement is about consequence, a voluntary behavior done to get reinforcement or avoid punishment. But an animal, including yourself, doesn't choose to feel fear to get a particular consequence. Instead, the fear is the consequence, and they choose behaviors that decrease the fear and increase feelings of security. So fight and flight are behaviors that are designed to decrease the feeling of fear, make the trigger further away so that I feel more secure. Comfort seeking, exploration, creeping up on something to sniff it, are all also behaviors that are there to increase the feelings of security and decrease fear. So if your pet comes to you and says, I'm scared, cuddle me, they are hoping to decrease their fear and increase their feelings of security, and we can do that for them, absolutely. And if they're feeling fear and we're using counter conditioning to make them feel better, yes, our goal is that they never have that reaction, and we're going to set them up to hopefully never have that reaction. but we're not worried about reinforcing that emotion of fear by using treats in that moment. Our actions can influence our pet's emotions. So just like if a toddler trips, falls, and scrapes their knee, we can make them more upset. Oh my gosh, are you okay? Did you break your leg? We can certainly increase their feelings of fear, but comforting them, saying, oh, are you okay? Does that hurt? Here, let me help you up, is not going to make them more fearful or more upset. So we can and should provide comfort and support for our pets if they want us to, if they're seeking us out as a way of dealing with their fear. If they're choosing other behaviors, then us jumping in there and petting them may not help them. But don't worry about reinforcing fear. Okay, so that being said, it's cool to use treats because we're not going to reinforce fear. So how do we use them? You're going to use treats in a couple of very specific ways. One is building positive associations. This is counter conditioning, creating a predictable pairing between something scary and something good. Again, order matters. Order matter. Made a mistake on that slide. We can also reward specific behavior like we would in any training exercise. So I might specifically give a treat when the animal takes a step toward me. Now, these can happen at the same time. Animal takes a step toward me, I'm rewarding them for stepping toward me. I'm also building positive associations with them being around me equals treats. So in this video, we see treats being used. So I'm just throwing treats at this nervous dog. I've entered the room, which is presenting the trigger, and I have offered food as the pairing with that. So I'm not dropping food into a corner and then sneaking in so that she doesn't notice me. It's not a distraction. I'm also not using food to bring her closer to me if she's not ready for that. I'm just making a pairing. Whatever she does, she does. She is looking at me, but I would not require that of her. She didn't want to look at me. I would still be throwing food at her. I want us to be cautious of using food to lure an animal to us, because what can happen is the animal comes for the food. Food is a big motivator. And now they've made their trigger more intense, closer, and that can lead them to actually feel more fear. They eat the treat and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm really close to you and I'm feeling this. And we can see more behaviors. It can also lead us to think the animal's feeling fine. Oh, they came up and took a treat out of my hand. They must be fine. But we know that can be a misleading statement as well. So here's a video discussing the wrong order for treats. So we put some treats down for her, and while she's eating them, we pet her. And what does she say? Stop it. So we did the wrong order there. We gave treats, and then we tried to do something that she was uncomfortable with. And what did she do? She said, stop that. And what can happen is we can actually train her not to eat those treats. We can lose the value of our treats because we've switched the order. And now the good thing predicts that a bad thing is happening. So if any of you have used peanut butter to try to trim your dog's nails, and now they won't eat peanut butter, this can be why. You use it as there's a distraction. And thankfully she was not committed to telling us to stop. Her fight mode was pretty chill, but we do see what the wrong order can do for us. What would have been right? Give those treats just for being close to us. Build that positive association without trying to touch her. Maybe offer a finger for her to touch and then give her treats for doing that. Maybe touch her once on her neck where she seemed kind of comfortable at first and then give her a treat. So the treat becomes the consequence of the petting. Okay, taking treats doesn't mean we're relaxed. Again, I want to hammer home this behavior. So you can see from the still of this dog that there is going to be an aggressive behavior reaction here. What's important to know is that this is a fearful dog. I was safe because I knew he was fearful, so we had these bars between us. And I didn't trigger this behavior in an attempt to see if he would be aggressive. I was getting to know him for the first time in a shelter environment. But I wanted to show this because I want you to see how the treats kind of hide maybe what the dog is really feeling. And I also want you to look for the different stages. Look and see how many of those S you see in this little video clip. So he's kind of looking away, but he's staying close, right? He's approaching. He's actually taking a treat from my hand. Kind of seems relaxed. He's listening to other things. Oh, he turned his head back away. I asked him if he wanted to sniff. Ooh, what was that? Okay. Did you see it? I know that a lot of times the video is a little choppy on the user end, but I hope that you saw that moment where I offered my hand for him to sniff. He had been taking treats from me. He was obviously in a little bit of maybe a fidget stage, maybe a little of a flight stage where he was turning his head, kind of looking everywhere but at me, but he was taking those treats. And then I offered my hand for him to sniff. And he sniffed it at first, and then as the duration progressed, I left my hand there for a while. He went very still. And it was actually a fairly prolonged stillness. It's something that, yeah, exactly. We see that freeze and that fight. So we see that prolonged stillness. Now in real life, it is sometimes we do not get that very long still moment, right? You could easily have been, here, sniff my hand, I'm gonna reach and get another treat, and not see that moment of stillness. But his mouth closed and he didn't move. I pulled my hand back slightly and he actually softened his face, kind of opened his mouth. And then I put my hand back. Not sure why I did that. That was a mistake. He froze again, and then we see this display. So I want you to watch it one more time. Whoops. So he's kind of distracted. He's looking away. I'm having to really hold his attention by talking. You can't hear me clicking to him, but I am talking to him, kind of trying to get his attention. He looks away. I consider that kind of a flight moment. Should I run away? And then there's the freeze. I move my hand away. He softens slightly, and then I move my hand back. And we see that behavior again. So this is not out of the blue, right? He did not suddenly do this. He was showing us he was fearful this whole time, and taking the treats didn't mean he was comfortable with me, and yet he wanted the treat, right? He's making that conflicted decision. So we can use treats absolutely with caution. We can use them to make a pairing with our presence or with the trigger of the presence of the trigger. And we can use them to reward specific behaviors, like taking a few steps closer, we can give treats. But we want to be cautious of how we use those treats. And we might want to incorporate other things beyond food to start connecting with the animals in our care. So one of the things I want to talk about is play. Specifically, encouraging an animal to play in a way that gives them the freedom to choose how close they are to us or to their trigger. So play that involves being in the vicinity of the trigger, but not hands-on, not touching. So I talk about contactless play, throwing a ball, not trying to take the ball back away, but having a bunch of toys and just sort of throwing them, letting the dog chase and bounce around, an interactive cat toy that we move at a distance. Solo play, so something the animal can play with on their own. And I say play as a check-in, like, how are you doing right now? We're at the park, there's some other dogs around, there's other people that can make you nervous. Do you want to play with me? How does that feel? And an animal who's willing to engage in play, he's probably feeling less fear and stress than an animal who isn't. So I want to show this really cute boy. So I hope you can tell that this is play, sort of bouncing around, lowering his front end, scampering back and forth. But what's important to notice is he is not letting me touch him. He is not actually coming closer to me. I'm using my hand to kind of play bitey face where I kind of go, I'm going to get your face. And he goes, yeah, I'm going to get your hand. But this is a dog who's expressing his stress in fidget mode. He's acting like he's really happy to be around me. He's playing, but he is not approaching. He's not making contact. He's not fully comfortable. So I'm using that play to start to bond with him. And in fact, what happens sometimes with dogs like this, if you experience this, dog who's kind of bouncing around, you kind of plant yourself and you say, I'm not going to do anything you're not ready for. They bounce around and they come in and maybe they make a little contact, they grab a toy and they play with the toy by themselves, but they don't come all the way. And then suddenly 20 minutes later, they take a running leap and land in your lap. And they're like, okay, I trust you now. Now, again, we know that might not be forever, but we've given them that space to check us out with the game without forcing ourselves on them. So play, really, really useful. And if we're not the ones that the pet is afraid of, right, we can play in the vicinity of a trigger, and play feels good in the same way treats feel good. Social support. The one thing I want to say about social support is your pet needs to enjoy that experience, that company of others. So you're not going to provide social support. If your dog is fearful of other dogs, then being around other dogs is not social support for them. If your dog is fearful of strangers, then being handed off to a stranger is not social support. Social support is being with someone that you trust and enjoy and feel confident with, and letting them kind of guide you through a new experience. So a familiar person can increase a dog's willingness to investigate something they're unsure of and unfamiliar with. There's actually been studies on this. They made like a scary fan. It had things waving off of it, and measured how comfortable the dogs were investigating such a thing. And it depended on if their owner was there and if their owner seemed fearful of the fan or confident about the fan. Other animals can be social support, conspecifics, meaning the same species as yours, though sometimes different species can be just as confidence building. But modeling that confident behavior, a shy pet can follow along. This is not the same thing as my dog is scared of other dogs, I'm going to take him to the dog park. Again, it's social support that your dog's already comfortable with. This is, if one dog needs to go to the vet, I take both dogs because it helps the shy dog feel safe to go along, to have their confident friend there. Enrichment. So building out your pet's life in a way that is more than their fear, in a way that encourages exploration at their pace and what feels good to them, that gives them control over their space to do things that they enjoy and they're interested in. We all need that kind of agency in our lives, and enrichment is about giving your pet that choice and that control. So exploring novel objects, and by that I mean something a particular item they've never seen. So tossing a box down on the ground for a dog or a cat to say, oh, where was this? What is this from? Can I sit in this? That's exploration of a novel object. Going to a new park where you're unlikely to run into the thing that makes your pet nervous, and letting them just kind of sniff and explore a new space. Problem solving is a great way to build confidence. I can act on my environment to get something I want, and I have to think and use my mind and maybe use my body. So both of these pets are showing off using food puzzles. I love food puzzles for a shy animal. Definitely would encourage you to introduce food puzzles and food enrichment toys to your pet's life, regardless of whether they're shy or not, but especially if they're shy. Sensory experiences, so sounds, smells, tastes, new ways to trigger their senses. Again, not even necessarily related to the thing they're afraid of, just filling out their world, making their world bigger, experiencing something new and not feeling fearful about it can actually make you more confident to tackle something that you are fearful of. And then making sure your pet is experiencing species appropriate behaviors, opportunities to do those. So for dogs, that's digging, sniffing, chewing, chasing, barking. For cats, scratching, perching up high, hunting. So we can do that with food puzzles and play inside, watching moving objects on TV or out a window. It doesn't mean let your cat into the backyard to go hunting. but experiencing that species appropriate behavior, again, is a really easy way to start to build confidence in the world that can then trickle into confidence in particular situations. And then we can use our training to teach specific skills that build our pet's confidence. And there are tons of these skills. So the first one would be greeting somebody. Knowing a specific way to greet something, again, that's predictable, can help us feel confident to do that. So this pup, Buster, was an SVPP foster dog and is very, very shy. And this little clip, I'm doing a Zoom training session and he's learning to hand target. So it's a really simple skill. So really, really simple. How do people greet dogs? They offer their hand. And so we're teaching him, when someone offers their hand, all you have to do is go touch it, go sniff it, and then you'll get a treat. It's not a lure in, it's just an opportunity to know what to do with that hand. Make it predictable. Cats, same thing. We use one finger for a cat, but you can use your hand as well. Stationing is go to and stay on a particular space. Really useful for, again, letting an animal know you don't need to worry about what's going on here. You just go there and relax and you'll be safe. You won't be approached. This is your spot. If I have guests coming over and I'm going to send my nervous dog over to lay on their bed, and so that they don't worry about what should they do. They don't get too close. They don't put themselves in a situation that makes them uncomfortable by kind of getting too close to a stranger in their home. Check it out could be a skill for go investigate that thing you've never seen before. So we have dogs who are out on walks who startle at the sight of, a lawn decoration or something strange that they've never experienced. We can actually teach them, hey, go check that out, meaning it's safe. Go sniff it at your pace as you'd like to. And again, making it predictable that they can learn to go investigate sort of on cue from us. Comfort with handling, so teaching there are animals that we can touch them in certain ways and it will pay off. And again, we're going to stay in their comfort space. Flight training, so this is not on a plane, but flight as in a response to fear, to run away. So we can actually teach an animal to choose to move away from a trigger rather than to choose to try to chase it away or just get stuck and sort of, I'm just going to stand here and continue to experience this fear. I can walk away and thus decrease my fear on my own. So this might look like using that stationing to teach a pet to go somewhere else, using those safe zones to teach a pet that they can take themselves out of a situation. This might be as simple as tossing treats, not handing treats to an animal, but tossing treats behind the animal so they have to walk away and then choose to come back if they want. We might teach a dog to hide behind us. If something's scaring them, they can hide behind us, or they can turn and walk in the opposite direction. Really common for dogs who are worried about other dogs, we teach them to turn and walk in the other direction. And then we can teach tricks. And honestly, trick training for shy animals is so powerful. And many of you have seen this video before. I can't help myself but show it again. This is that's my bunny. He's not actually shy, but he always sneaks in there because he's just really cute. But this is a very fearful cat, a shy dog, who learned to approach a human and make physical contact with them completely on their own through a silly trick. So silly tricks are really, really powerful tools. I wouldn't underestimate them. I encourage you to train your pet to do some tricks just for fun and see the benefit that comes from something like that. And then I want to just include how to introduce yourself to a shy pet. So stepping away from the pets that are in our care and briefly talking about if you come across a shy pet in other places in your life. The first question I want you to ask is just, should you introduce yourself to a shy pet? Is it going to be a good experience for them? Is it just you really want to pet that cute dog? So you're going to try to get them to like you so that you could pet them. If it's not going to be a positive experience for them, maybe you just give them that space and you say, oh, you're very cute from a distance, but without sort of trying to be that person who says, oh, but I'm great with cats, I'm great with dogs. As an owner of a shy animal, you know that that's kind of a frustrating experience, so you don't need to be that yourself. make sure you're cautious with luring them and really let them decide how and when they're going to approach you. Ask them if you can touch them. What does that look like? It means I touch you a little bit and then I stop and I wait for you to not just hold still, because we know that's freeze, and not sniff or turn away or step away, not that fidget or that flight, but actually to come closer, to nudge my hand, to lick my hand, to ask me, tell me, yes, please continue to pet me, and keep doing that. Pet a little bit more, stop again. Are you still enjoying this? Remind them that they can stop the interaction, they can move away, and that might look like tossing a treat away from you and saying like, okay, take a break. And if they're like, okay, great, I got my treat, but I want more, great, excellent. If they walk a few feet away, eat the treat, and then are like, maybe I won't come back, then you know they were starting to feel uncomfortable. And make sure you're doing their favorite thing. So if they want to play, grab a toy. If their favorite thing is chasing a ball, let's throw a ball for them. Again, let's make it about them before we think about what we would like to cuddle with them and pet them and have them sit on our laps. But maybe first we need to do their favorite thing so they can build that trust with us. Last, luckily, because I'm running out of time, is expectations for fearful pets, shy pets. It is going to take time to overcome these. If your pet was just going to get over their fear, habituate to their fear, they would have done that already, honestly. So once you start implementing these tools, managing their fears, protecting them from that experience, building in desensitization and counter conditioning into their life, giving them more enrichment and experiences, it's still going to take a long time to change that emotional reaction. So keep a journal, keep a record of how things are going so that you know it's getting better. Consider species and individual differences. So what does your specific pet need to help them feel confident? It's going to look different depending on their species and their individual needs. Protect them from that fear. If they're continuing to feel fear because of strangers in one context, while you're training in another context, they're not going to start to feel better. So this might mean if your dog is afraid of being left alone, you need to stop leaving them alone except for your training. If your dog is afraid of other dogs, you need to stop going to the dog park, things like that. Build on success where they are now, build up from there. I should also have thrown out here, get professional help. Get advice from someone who has experience working with fearful animals and understands the steps that I've laid out here, and is talking about desensitization and counter conditioning and avoiding punishment and avoiding triggering that fear. Because this can be challenging, especially from the inside. You might not see the ways that you could change and address what you're dealing with. And final thought, just remember that fulfilled lives don't all look the same. So one of your pets, one of your dogs might love going for car rides and going through the drive-thru and picking up a puppuccino at Starbucks and going out and sitting at an outdoor cafe and watching the people come by and all the things. And another one of your dogs might be fearful of all those things. They might just be really stressed and they're barking at everything and they're panting and they're frozen and they're trying to run away and maybe they've even snapped at a couple people. That dog can stay home and still have a very fulfilled life. So you're going to come home and you're going to give that dog some enrichment, some training, a quiet walk in a quiet neighborhood, some cuddles on the couch, and they can lead just as wonderful a life. So make sure you're meeting your dog's needs, your pet's needs, in the way that makes sense for them and their fear, and don't hold them to a standard of some other individual. All right. I ran right up to my hour. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Silicon Valley Pet Project for having me. This is everybody's websites and social media. If you are thankful to Silicon Valley Pet Project for putting on events like this for free, please let them know. A donation is really appreciated if that's in your financial capabilities, but also sharing and liking on social media, super, super useful. And thank you all for saying thank you to me. And we've got my websites, Canine Engineering and FelineEngineering.com, and on Instagram and Facebook. I also really appreciate the likes and shares on social. And I offer as well private behavior consulting and training. Right now, much of it is being done through Zoom, just like this. And some of you have experienced that and I think have found it useful. So please don't be afraid to reach out if you have specific questions. You can also email me directly at jessica@canineengineering.com or at felineengineering.com. But as we wrap up, I just want to make sure no one had any questions. I know we covered a lot. So again, if you want to reach out at a later date on social media or through the website, absolutely feel free to do that. And you'll be getting a copy of the recording of this webinar in the next few days. That'll be available. I'll give people a question. Yeah. Oh yeah, between fearful and just barking. So we're looking at the whole context. What's the body language doing? And what is the behavior achieving? So a dog who goes bark, bark, bark until the person walks away and then stops barking is probably hoping to achieve making that person walk away. A person who goes bark, bark, bark a dog who goes bark, bark, bark until a person comes up to them and they can jump on them and say hi, is probably excited trying to make that person come closer. So what makes the behavior happen? What makes the behavior continue? What makes the behavior stop? And then what's the rest of the body language doing? And it's a little bit of a tricky, some dogs, the barking all seems to be the same. But if we assume it's fear and we start training and working on some other things, we should see the behavior decrease regardless. Though if it's excitement, we might tweak that plan just slightly. What age do dogs typically become set in their fears? It's a really interesting question, and I think it's a little hard for me to answer because of these different factors that come into play. So I kind of think of it the same way as a human. We know that some children are very fearful and they kind of grow out of that. Some children are very fearful and they continue to be very fearful and nervous. Some children don't seem worried about anything and then they enter adolescence. Teenage years can be a tricky time for a lot. Our brains are changing. Our dogs and cats' brains change in the same way. They go through the same phase. So sometimes a fear can be set immediately. One really bad incident, especially for a young animal, one really bad incident just sets that fear. And it lasts until we do the work to get away from that. For some animals, if it's going to be a lack of exposure experience, we might see that they don't experience any fear until they're exposed to something new, say a new move. They used to live in one space and they move to another space and the triggers there are very different. So then we see that fear and then we don't address it right away because we think, oh, they're going to get over that, right? And it becomes a repeated habit or a pattern. So unfortunately, it's hard to say, but I certainly take fear very seriously in puppies and adolescents because that is when they're forming that personality. Hopefully I answered those two questions thoroughly for both of you. Anything else? All right, I'm trying to go to my last slide. It doesn't want to go. There we go. I got there eventually. So there's all that social media information one more time. Again, thank you for being here and for participating, and have a really great evening.